Hey, hello, wherever you are. John Fung of Uber for Business here, and I have the pleasure of moderating today's webinar. We're going to get things started very shortly. Please take the time that you can hear me correctly. You should also right now be seeing the introductory slide to today's webinar on screen, proudly entitled How Coca-Cola Puts Culture First During Difficult Times. I see a few folks still enter the webinar. I'll give them a minute to get settled. All right, I'm going to be back in a couple of minutes to kick things off and introduce our speakers. So hang tight if you're here. All right, well, thank you all so much for joining us. My name is John Fung. I'm the head of Global Account Management for Uber for Business, and I will be moderating today's webinar. We are incredibly excited to share today's discussion between executives from two industry-defining companies, Coca-Cola and Uber. Before we get started, a few housekeeping items. Today's webinar is being recorded, and we'll send out the recording in the coming days. We hope that you'll share it with your friends and colleagues. At any point during this webinar, you can use the Q&A button at the bottom of your screen to submit a question. I encourage you to submit your questions as they come up. We would love to hear them. And we're going to allow time at the end to go through as many as we can. If we don't get to yours, we'll follow up with you via email. Now, for those of you not familiar with us, Uber for Business is a platform for managing global rides, meals, and local deliveries for companies of any size. We have more than 150,000 customers in 26 countries around the world. We have a unique vantage point to the challenges that many of these companies have faced over the past 12 months. Now, chief among them was the way to find new ways to stay connected with employees and customers, given the old models of engagement were no longer available. Many of them found creative ways to host virtual events, celebrate holidays, get workers to the office, and feed employees in the field. We've had large banks feed essential workers who are serving customers in branches. We have companies send care packages and dinner treats for virtual parties, and we're giving employees peace of mind when going to the office or warehouse for a safe way to get to and from work. In terms of our customers in human resources roles, what we heard from them is they need new ways to surprise and delight their employees. They want to be able to communicate just how much their company valued them during such a difficult time, ideally in a way that can be shared with others. So, given all of the changes in the workplace over the past year, the importance of a strong human resources function has now become abundantly clear. And today, I'm very, very pleased that we have an expert in the field joining us. Robin Gee, the Vice President of Human Resources for Coca-Cola Company's North America Operating Unit and Flagship Market. Robin has been with Coca-Cola since 2004, serving in a number of HR and employee engagement roles and overseeing as many as 23,000 associates across 17 business units. She develops and executes people strategies and solutions that drives growth and impact talent management, employee engagement, change management, and career and leadership development. We are so thrilled to have you here, Robin, and thank you for taking the time. Also with us today is Andrew Macdonald, Senior Vice President of Mobility and Business Operations at Uber. Mac is what we call him, and Mac is responsible for the company's global ride-sharing operations and other mobility businesses, including public transit partnerships and micro-mobility. He oversees core business functions such as business development, corporate B2B offerings, and prior to this role, he was the VP for Uber's Americas operations. Robin and Mac, thank you so much for joining us today for this discussion. Now, before we get into the meat of today's presentation, I thought it'd be fun to ask Mac and Robin a few kind of questions about each other's companies. So Mac, can you share with our global audience, what is your favorite Coke product?
First off, really great to be here, and thanks to Robin for taking the time. So I did a little, Coke is such an expansive operation, and there's just such a broad product suite. I actually had to do a rescan of the whole portfolio to make sure I fully understood all the different things I was thinking. And there was a couple products that I consumed that I didn't realize were actually within the Coca-Cola umbrella. So I would say my number one is probably Coca-Cola Classic, although a Fanta every once in a while is a treat. And then the other one I had forgotten was Coca-Cola. I grew up playing hockey. I'm from Toronto originally and grew up playing hockey like many Canadians. And there was nothing I look forward to more after a hockey game than a blue Powerade. So those are probably my top three.
It is a very comprehensive answer, Mac. And Robin, you can see that we are lovers of your products here. Well, Robin, just to turn around, and we don't have quite as many products as Coca-Cola, can you let us know your favorite Uber product?
Absolutely. Hi, John, and hi, Mac. I'm happy to be here and look forward to the discussion today. But this is actually an easy one for me to answer. So I have two teenage boys at home, and they're always hungry. So Uber Eats is a frequent go-to for me in my home. So that's an easy one.
That is great to hear, Robin, and well done on surviving with teenagers during the pandemic. I hear that is not easy as father of young children myself. Okay, well with that, my pleasure to turn it over to Mac to continue the interview with Robin. Mac, over to you, sir.
Thanks, John. I'll do my best to keep the energy up here on the back of that great introduction. So Robin, thank you so much. I was interested in reading your background. Your longevity at Coca-Cola, it's very impressive. And I'm sure there are a few folks who have such a view into the corporate culture. So we're very lucky to have you here with that experience. Maybe we start right there. Corporate culture, employee engagement, totally interlinked and interrelated, of course. So maybe we start with culture. How do you think about, as a HR leader, but also just as a leader of the organization at Coca-Cola, how do you think about culture? How do you define culture? And then where do you see the intersect with employee engagement?
Absolutely. Thanks, Mac. And, for me, culture is a part of the fabric of what makes up an organization. It's really defined as the cultural norms and behaviors that are accepted within the organization. And ultimately, it really affects and leads to the employee experience. So that's where I think you start to see the correlation and the relationship to employee engagement, because employee engagement is really traditionally defined as how a person thinks, feels, and acts toward an organization. And culture can either lead to improving that experience and helping foster engagement, or it could also have the adverse effect of leading to disengagement. And interestingly, recently in a town hall within the company, our CEO and chairman, James Quincy, hosted the town hall. And one of our employees asked, how would he define, or how would he like to define our culture within the organization? And his response was really simple. All he said was ours. And I think it's important to note, I think it's a very, very simple answer, because it's very simple in that culture is not owned or led by HR or any particular function. We co-create it, and each employee has a role to play in that process in the organization. So that's why it's so important to be really crystal clear on what you want your culture to be, so that we know what we're working toward.
I think that's a great answer, and that's one of the crisper definitions I've heard of culture. One of the uh, quotes I always go to is a quote from Brian Chesky, who's the Airbnb founder and CEO, where he says, "Culture is simply a shared way of doing something with passion," which I also like, and it does sort of speak to longevity as well. So what is Coke's culture? What's Coke's culture like, and how does that tie into the tremendous business success you've had?
Well, it's interesting that you ask, and I think it's important that I give you a little context or speak a little bit to the journey that we've been on from a cultural perspective. And our journey recently began, well, several years ago in 2017, when James Quincy was named chairman and CEO. And at that time, he introduced a new vision for the organization. And with that vision and that growth ambition, he was very clear in declaring that as an organization, we needed to transform our culture in order to achieve that growth. And through that process, we really began to double down and look at, what does that mean? What does that look like? How does that need to show up across the organization? And we began to define the growth behaviors that were important, that all employees across the globe understood as being critical that we demonstrate in order to drive that growth. And those growth behaviors really boiled down to four that we landed on. It was one around being curious, being empowered, being inclusive, and being agile. And so as we landed those behaviors, we really began to infuse those through a cultural movement across the organization in terms of engaging individuals and leaders and what that might look like, building those behaviors into all of our people processes. And over time, we began to see the cultural norms that we were seeking start to stick, and we started to see those changes. And as we moved into 2019, we were getting additional feedback from leaders and from employees that said, we get it, we get the behaviors, we get the vision, but what's our purpose? Give us, we need a shared purpose. And with that, leadership responded. In 2019, James Quincy again unveiled our shared purpose, which is to refresh the world and make a difference. And I say all this because this is really critical as we kind of moved through 2019 and entered 2020, when we began to be tested in ways like we hadn't seen in many years with the pandemic. And it truly gave us an opportunity to, again, lean into our culture, lean into those behaviors to move through the pandemic in a form of strength. And through that, we also saw that by doing so and by adjusting to where we needed to adjust as part of the pandemic, we also continued to see us improve and make even more aggressive gains in our culture. So for example, leadership really leaned in and began to communicate, over-communicate during this time. And what we found was, as we moved to a virtual environment for our office employees, many more connections and collaborations came to light. And people on teams and leaders became much more relatable because you started to see inside people's homes. You met their spouses, you met their children, you saw their pets. And so that relatability factor was really transformational. And then we began to see leaders truly leading with empathy and how they were responding to the various needs of associates. So again, these cultural components started really coming to life. And then certainly other challenges we were faced with in terms of having to pivot. Much of our business was changing dramatically, and teams were pivoting to the work that matters most and getting opportunity to do short-term assignments or other work to build their skills while also at the same time contributing to the organization. So all really, really critical advancements during this particular crisis.
Yes, so many of the themes you just talked about, both in 2020 and pre-2020 for Coca-Cola, really resonate and ring true. I mean, you may hear my 8-month-old as we're on this call, and I think, we had our child during COVID, and I feel like I've been able to share that more with my colleagues because I'm seeing them have their families, run into the room during a Zoom or a critical meeting. And it's just, it has made all the way from the leadership team on down, everybody feel a little bit more relatable. And it's sort of that feeling of, hey, we're all going through this and it's an adjustment, but it doesn't mean we can't operate and perform at a very high level. The other thing I've heard from, and we've experienced at Uber, has just been people have felt invigorated by the speed of decision making that we had to go through in those early days. And so there's a little bit of like culture forged by fire, decision making processes got quicker. We were taking a little bit more risk. And also something I heard you say, which is we were communicating just much more as a leadership team, providing transparency, trying to lead with empathy, being clear about what we knew, what we didn't know, what our principles for decision making were. And we didn't always get it right, but at least folks felt like they were getting information from us regularly and honestly. So all those things were powerful, and we got good feedback from our employees through it. Now everybody's tired now, and of course, I think ready to be on the other side of this thing. There's many, many, many downsides, of course, but there is some, benefit as it comes to shaping culture. I know you at Coca-Cola, you've been through an exercise of listening to employees more over the past year. What have you been hearing? Like what's been needed? What's been wanted?
Yes, it's a great question. And certainly listening, whether it be through formal mechanisms or informal mechanisms, has been a standing strategy for us. And it's something that we continue to do, certainly in the pandemic. And I believe it was late second quarter of 2020, we sought feedback from employees related to how they were doing, what their experience was. And honestly, the responses we got back were not really surprising, but it did help us, understand and make sure that we were continuing to lean in where we needed to. So some of the feedback we received were people were working harder than ever before. We were in this remote environment. There were a lot of uncertainties, but people truly were working harder than ever before. There was some struggle in that there were no longer boundaries between work and home. So, talk about work-life integration. It was fully integrated because there was really no clear start and end to a workday. And then, a lot of screen fatigue. So that was real for folks in terms of what they were experiencing. In addition, we were hearing, people were anxious even at that point to understand when we'd get back in the office. There was a sense of in some cases, for some, a bit of loneliness, not having that in-person connection, while at the same time, on a converse perspective, we were also hearing that people felt more connected than they ever had. So, in this virtual environment where we were communicating so heavily and everyone was connected, it was like a level playing field. People were feeling connected in new ways. And then, certainly, as I'm sure you guys experienced, a lot of challenges with balancing all of the demands. So, when you're working in a home environment and that's in a new situation, you're homeschooling your children or they're in virtual learning or have childcare issues, elder care issues, et cetera. So there were a lot of challenges with individuals trying to figure out how to navigate that norm and really manage their time and their well-being. So those were some of the things we were hearing. Now, on the flip side of that, we were also hearing some positives. Employees were really responding positively to how leaders were showing up, and we were getting a lot of positive feedback from a leadership perspective. Again, going back to how leaders were leaning in with empathy, over communicating. There was a true sense that as an organization, we were putting people first and making decisions with the best interests of our people in mind. And then also the increased flexibility in terms of really over communicating the message around flexibility of how they get their work done and really being able to adjust and manage the demands at home. So those are some of the key call outs we were hearing mid last year. And I would say it's probably fairly consistent even today. Yeah,
and certainly from our perspective, it's consistent with what we have been hearing at Uber as well. That both the challenges and the opportunities. I've had so much empathy for so many different groups of individuals going through this. You mentioned the challenges for caregivers. That was a group that we were very plugged into, and the flip side has been, I think, hopefully the increased flexibility that has become the norm a little bit more in corporate life across the world is long-term beneficial for caregivers, because big difference if you can work in the office 3 days a week versus 5, or, transition part-time on the back of a parental leave, or those types of things. So I'm hopeful about the long term, but in the short term, the challenges have been immense. But I do think the future of work will change for everyone to varying degrees, and that's going to be a really interesting journey to go on. We'll have to see, one of the things we've been discussing as a leadership team is what happens to sort of long-term employee engagement and culture. It's one thing to survive a year of totally remote work while we're all going through it together. It's another thing, what does that do over 3 years, 5 years, 10 years, when colleagues haven't met, or you're in a virtual environment? And I don't think anybody knows right now. So we're sort of in a bit of an experiment.
Yeah, absolutely. I think all of those are questions that we're all grappling with in terms of what are the long-term profound implications for having gone through this pandemic, and what that's going to lead to, as we move forward. So I guess, more to come as we all navigate that journey.
Yeah, we will see. And it'll be interesting to see the varying speeds to which different workplaces, companies, cultures, et cetera, try to go back to normal, or whether they view the normal as having permanently changed. Mm-hmm. Let's switch and talk a little bit about engagement. And I'm going to lead with a few statistics here. So we're looking at a recent poll by Gallup, and needless to say that highly engaged employees seem to result in better outcomes for organizations. You've got lower absenteeism, higher profitability, and higher productivity. And I think that's super intuitive. I don't think any of us would be surprised to see those types of statistics, as well as other performance outcomes that go with it. I think what we'll have to see, and what we were just talking about, is in a world of remote work, and perhaps more remote work in the future, how do you develop and keep engaged employees? I know at Uber, we typically do in addition to all the various informal feedback channels you've got, there's a few different ways we are getting a pulse check on employee engagement. One is we do a regular or annual, sometimes biannual, but more typically annual internal pulse survey. What we're finding through, and this is typically 20 plus minutes, answer a lot of different questions about how you're feeling about your work, company's values, mission, culture, how engaged you are, your manager, your team, all these different things. And it's pretty comprehensive, but it's 1 to 2 times a year. And what we found is through COVID, we've had a desire to get more regular feedback than that, because things are changing so much, and it's sort of unprecedented. So we're now pivoting to do more sort of shallower but real-time feedback from employees. Think 5-minute, 5 or less question type surveys, and not necessarily going to the entire company every time, because you end up with survey fatigue and this and that, but going to different sort of populations, just to try to get more real-time live feedback. And I think that's going to generate some positive results. We're just going down that path. The other thing that we've leaned more into through COVID is the feedback from our employee resource groups. So, this has really plugged us in particular to, parts of the organization, and which really represent parts of society that have been more impacted by COVID, or disproportionately impacted. So parents, people of color, women, these various communities that where COVID, it shows up in the data, both our internal data and just societal data around the impact on COVID and the disproportionate impact on these groups. And so that's the ERGs have been a really key source of information, guidance, frankly, coaching for our leadership team as we've navigated this crisis. So I'm interested to hear, if that's been a similar experience at Coke, and how Coke sort of approaches employee engagement overall.
Absolutely. And what I would share is I do hear a lot of similarities in terms of what you're sharing in terms of the Uber approach and things that we're doing, and various approaches that we've used. In order to be additive, what I would share is that we think of employee tackle employee engagement through the employee experience. So we look at it holistically through the end-to-end experience of the employee. And engagement is ultimately just really a measure of that experience and how we're doing to create the best possible experience for that individual to really show up and give their best every day at work. So, so as we think about engagement, we step back and we really tackle it from that end-to-end employee experience. And we have a globally diverse organization, so it's not a one size fits all. We have an approach for where we really look to collect feedback, similar to the survey components that you're talking about. We have both informal and formal mechanisms to do that. And in addition, we seek to pull people into the process, so pull other employees into the process to give us their input, their insights, and be a part of solutions that help improve that employee experience. So one example in North America is, following our last large survey, we created a team of culture and engagement agents. And through that process, we collected feedback around what are some of the areas that you see of greatest opportunity. And they came back with, flexible working and improving how we work and giving more people flexibility. And from that, we realized we needed to do more to communicate what was available to people, communicate more about the policies, et cetera. And with the input from that team, we began a process of recommunicating and branding it around your work, your way. And as we moved into 2020, that really gained more traction with our employee population, as they really needed to leverage those policies and practices and that dialogue with their leader to manage their work in a way that worked best for them. In addition, in 2020, we were also looking for impactful ways to inspire and show appreciation to our employee population. And one of the things that we landed on was a program with Uber called an at-meal home on us. And so with that, we provided all of our North American associates with a $100 gift card for Uber in order to share a meal with their family, or many people offered that and use it in volunteer capacities to provide food to others. But it was really, really well received. In promoting it, we had our group president, he sent out a email to all of our North American associates. And it really spoke to the fact in an inspirational way and an uplifting way that, yes, we're in this together, but we're going to come through it stronger. And this is one of the ways that we can pull the team together and have a shared experience in a very virtual or geographically diverse environment. From that, we asked people, share your feedback, share your comments, share your stories. And what was really exciting is we did get a lot of fabulous feedback from associates across the organization who were so grateful and appreciative for this particular initiative and for the company to offer this benefit to them. And it also gave an opportunity for the teams to react. We asked them to engage on our social media platforms, and they did. They showed up in so many ways, sharing pictures, often pictures of them with their families, or pictures of them having where the food was delivered in a volunteer type capacity. So it was truly uplifting and inspiring to check out the feeds on a day-to-day basis and see kind of what people were doing, how they were using it, etc. So although it was super well received from our employee population, it really was a win on many fronts. And when I talked earlier about our purpose and how our purpose was really important in terms of how we moved through the pandemic in terms of refreshing the world and making a difference, this also really allowed us to make a difference in multiple ways. Not only were we making a difference with our employee population, but it gave us an opportunity to also infuse support to our food service customers who are truly struggling during this time. So it was really a win-win in terms of the power of our system and our employees in order to benefit multiple, partners. So it truly was a really successful program that folks still, positively refer to this day. Now, coming out of that initiative, we continue to look for ways that we could use gift cards or vouchers in creative ways to bring people together. So you'll see a number of types of ideas. And And Mac, you referenced business resource groups. So this was an area where we also saw some traction where business resource groups were using gift cards or vouchers in order to create excitement for events or to engage with their members. One of the events that really stood out to me and was near and dear to me was the Veterans Day. So we provided 600 gift cards to all of our Coca-Cola veterans as a way of saying thank you for your service. We also provided vouchers for Uber Eats to 1,000 frontline food service employees to thank them for all that they were doing during this pandemic. So ultimately, it was a way that we identified to connect with people at a time when it was really challenging to do so. So all really great uses of gift cards and vouchers that helped us connect people and inspire folks as we were all navigating the challenges at that particular time.
Very cool. Very cool. Lots of ideas there to borrow from for us going forward here. Yeah, the enterprise resource groups, business resource groups, they've been core to our efforts as well. I think a lot of our successful engagement efforts through COVID have actually been spearheaded by these groups, which bring together people of sort of similar backgrounds or interests, and that has naturally turned into panel discussions, compelling guest speakers, skill development, workshops, virtual gatherings, book clubs, even, these types of things, which have sort of made people feel like they've got a connection to the organization that goes beyond just, Zoom meeting after Zoom meeting with very targeted, business focused objectives. We've also done a fair bit of work to think about how do we extend some of the benefits that people get in the office to their at-home environment. We created a work from home stipend so that folks could, have some dollars to put towards their home office setup or whatever their virtual setup is, because people are in all sorts of different situations in terms of their ability to easily work from home, right? And that's certainly been a challenge. And also some of our wellness programs we've tried to pivot and make a little bit more work from home friendly, that is a bit more broader and expansive in terms of how people are able to keep and stay healthy through COVID. So all sorts of stuff. I do think creating that sort of feeling of team that, again, just goes beyond your work, and that's hard to get on email or Slack or Zoom with 30 people. That continues to be elusive for us, but we're trying, and there's lots of things you can do. It is harder though. I think interesting if one interesting thing that we've actually seen, and particularly as it relates to our Uber for Business product portfolios, we've actually seen a number of our customers work with us on employee engagement programs as you described. But then also replicate some of those for the customer engagement purposes that are also harder to take care of virtually, right? And I can think of one example where Unilever gave 9,000 employees in North America a voucher for Uber Eats this summer. The idea was extremely popular internally, as we just saw. It was similar was at Coke. And then their teams took that idea and said, okay, actually, we can use this to drive virtual external event attendance and engagement with some of our other programs, sales or otherwise, for our customers. So we've seen that in a few different places. My understanding is at Coke, there's been similar examples. Can you take me through some of the creative ways Coke's used our products for customer engagement?
Sure. There have been a couple, of different marketing promotions that we've tried in 2020, kind of as we've learned and tested. But one good example that I could share is there was an opportunity for us to provide Uber gift cards as part of a marketing promotion where we were looking to create excitement for a major league soccer playoff that was happening, where people couldn't be in attendance. So using it to create excitement for that particular event. In addition, we've seen our account teams using gift cards or vouchers as it relates to bringing people together as part of meetings. So whether it's coming together for a lunch meeting or being able to include that type of social connection during a meeting that you can get by sharing lunch together, even if it's virtually. So those are opportunities that we saw come to life. And we're really working throughout all of this to meet our consumers where they are. And so we've had an opportunity, and in partnership with you all in terms of joint customers too, to really try some things that we've not had the opportunity to do before and see some successes there.
Those are great examples. It's going to be such an interesting one to watch. How does how does external engagement change going forward? Customer engagement, conferences, these types of things. I spoke at an investor conference last week, and I was chatting with the organizer before, and he said, I can't wait till we're able to do this again in person. And I think there's going to, this would be a better event if we were all together in person. But then he said, on the other hand, our attendance for these conferences is higher than ever. We're getting more RSVPs, yes, because the barriers to attending are lower. People don't need to fly to New York City or fly to wherever, take 2 days out of their core schedule, incur all that cost. People are able to attend, and they're able to do so virtually from their own desk. And so the sort of pros and cons of it were interesting, and they start to show up in every way you think about these things. Okay, shifting gears a little bit, why don't we talk a bit about exactly what I was just saying, which is how do things look going forward? And of course, workplaces are going to change as the world is going to change. We're looking at this as a leadership team. We think that workplaces are going to change. This PwC survey here says that 61% of CEOs surveyed believe low density workplaces are going to represent an enduring shift after the pandemic is over. How are you thinking about, how is your leadership team thinking about return to office? What's the current thinking on what that looks like for Coke?
Yeah, I mean, again, an interesting question. And at this point, we don't have all the answers. We are still, from an office perspective, our office associates are by and large still working virtually, with that intended to run at least through the summer. And then, we've got a task force that is in place. It's really monitoring what's happening externally and kind of learning as we go and listening to experts in terms of the best approach. So, over time we'll navigate that, but I don't think there's any question that the return is going to look different than once we left. There's not going to be a mass entrance back into the offices as if the pandemic had not occurred. So, starting to think about how do we then, create an environment that's hybrid, where you may have, various routines of how people are working together. So I think it's going to be really important to think through how we're supporting the teams, how we are able to sustain some of the great learnings and the great connections and the communication and that sense of inclusiveness that we've been able to harness as part of, this virtual environment. How do we then carry that forward into an environment where you're going to have, a variety of different circumstances in terms of how people are working and where they're working, whether they're co-located or a hybrid type scenario. So, I think at the end of the day, that's going to be critical. And it's something that we've got to really put the effort and the energy in to sort out. But we don't want to lose what we've gained as part of this process, but we recognize, people are also craving the opportunity to have that opportunity to be together in some way, shape, or form as well.
Yeah, you're totally right. It's how do you preserve the sort of positives of the shift in how we work while addressing some of the challenges. And I don't think anyone has a perfect formula, because I tend to agree with you. I think hybrid is here to stay for most companies. But even hybrid has its drawbacks. I know, I'm often on the road, or I'm often not based where most of our leadership team is. And I can think of our weekly executive leadership team call where, pre-pandemic, there was only a couple of us that were on Zoom and everyone else was in person together. And post-pandemic, we're all on Zoom. And it's much, it feels for me like an easier call to navigate, to be engaged, because everyone's sort of on the same turf. I know one of our subsidiaries that as they've gone back to the office, but they've also got a lot of folks that are not back in office, they've instituted a rule for meetings above a certain size. People in the office actually have their computers open in a conference room with the video on them. So even though they're chatting with each other live, the people on the call can see everyone, and it feels so. Lots of different models to experiment with and tinker with, because I definitely think hybrid can be challenging too. If you've got people in the office, people out of the office, making sure it doesn't feel like exclusive or any of these different things. So I don't know how you're thinking about this, or if you have any tips for folks that are listening, but I'd be interested to hear them.
I think it's interesting everything you just shared. I tend to agree. I think a hybrid model is a bit more difficult to navigate than certainly an all virtual or a co-located model. But my perspective is that leadership is going to be critical and key, because it's going to be the leader who sets the example in terms of how we create that environment. As we are, in a hybrid situation. And I think it's important that the leader is ensuring that, to your point around kind of folks being on camera and being visible, that everyone feels included and feels a part of the conversation or a part of a meeting or is included in the celebration, et cetera. And that, that the leader is really making a concerted effort to do that consistently across the board with everyone on their team. So I think that's where it's going to become an opportunity to make sure that we're really educating and helping foster that type of environment across the board.
Yeah, you're bang on. Leadership matters. It matters on so many different dimensions, clearly. And one of the things we've talked about as a leadership team is people are going to mirror our behaviors regardless of what the policies are. And so if you've got flexible policies, but people look up the ladder and they don't see that their managers or their leadership team is also taking advantage of those policies, it's likely that you'll revert to past norms. And that may be okay, it may not be, but I think it's important that leaders at least are cognizant that whatever their behaviors are, people will mirror them. And if you truly want a remote friendly or hybrid friendly environment, that at least some of your leadership team needs to demonstrate those behaviors. So I said I would happily volunteer to be working from the beach every Friday so everyone can see it's normal.
Absolutely.
Any other closing thought? I think we're going to move to Q&A here in a second. Anything else on your mind, or anything you want to share with the audience before we get to that Q&A?
I guess the only thing I would tie it up and kind of leave you with on that note is really, from my perspective, as we navigated the pandemic, having done the work that we had done leading into it around culture and purpose and being clear on our vision, really were strengths that we were able to leverage in order to navigate a pandemic where there were so many uncertainties and things that we had never faced before. So it really proved to be our North Star. And throughout all of that, keeping people at the forefront of those decisions in terms of how we navigated it. So in the end, I think, we'll see that we'll come out of this stronger because we stayed true to those things that were most important in terms of the organizational goals, driving growth, and then the people.
Yeah, I think that's great. John, I think you're going to take over, but Robin, thank you so much. We've all been going through this really challenging time the past year, and it's challenging in so many different ways. Figuring out how to navigate all the challenges for our employees and our team and our culture, sometimes you feel like you're doing this stuff in a vacuum and you're thinking to yourself, are we getting this right as an organization? So from my perspective, it's really encouraging and helpful to hear how y'all at Coke have handled it, because I think there's a lot of similarities, but I also heard a number of ideas that I think we can borrow from. So thank you very much.
Absolutely.
Yeah, thanks so much, Mac, and thanks, Robin. I mean, it's pretty clear how Coca-Cola has become one of the great brands in the whole world. It's through having some of the great and most loyal employees in the whole world. So I think we have a lot to learn from you as we follow your footsteps. All right, we have a few minutes for Q&A. Thank you to all of you for posting some really interesting questions. I'm trying to pick some of the provocative ones that came up. And there was a lot of interest on this notion of hybrid. And one of you basically mentioned this concept of that all remote or all in person is actually much easier than kind of hybrid in terms of fairness and equity. So first question to you, Robin. As our company moves to a hybrid setup with some workers in the office and others at home, how important do you think it is to offer equal benefits? For example, if food is offered to employees in the office, should it also be offered to employees working from home, et cetera, et cetera?
Yes, I mean, I think, certainly as we think about hybrid environments, it's going to be very important that we find ways that are impactful and meaningful and inclusive to recognize and show appreciation or celebrate with the entire population. And from my experience, food is a great way to bring people together and a shared experience to celebrate. So, I think that's one option that goes nicely with being able to pull people together and recognize them in a way consistently, whether you're in a hybrid or a virtual environment.
Oh, well said, well said. This one's to both of you, I think. For global companies such as yours, do you approach employee engagement differently in various regions, or are the programs truly global? Maybe Robert, if you want to take one first, and then Mac, you can speak on the Uber side.
Sure, thank you. So within Coca-Cola, we aspire to build a culture that is supportive of engagement and a networked organization that drives engagement as well. But we recognize, we're a very diverse organization, and different parts of the world may be in different phases of that journey. So we do work to collect feedback and key themes. We communicate those key themes across the organization and those expectations that we're seeking to drive. But then locally, we expect leaders to lean in and address those local needs and take appropriate actions to then further enhance and drive engagements of their local teams.
Yeah, Matt, anything to add?
No, I mean, very similar, honestly. I mean, we've got a cultural value at Uber, as you know, John, which is we build globally, live locally. It's this, being a global company is amazing in so many ways. It's also challenging in lots of different ways, right? And we try to get the best of both worlds, which is to have a consistent culture, to be, approach things in a global fashion, whether that's on the customer side, the products we build and how we ship them, or on the employee side, the policies, benefits, all these different things. But the reality is you end up with some combination of both. And we also want leaders to feel empowered to do what needs to be done for their teams. And, frankly, different markets have experienced the pandemic in different ways and have different norms. And some places offices are open, others closed. So, we have really tried to bring a consistent global approach to managing culture and values. And I think we get the balance roughly right between global and local, but that's always the tension we're trying to work on.
Yeah, that's great points. And I think Uber and Coke to me are two of the great brands where you think of wherever in the whole world. If you're in America, in Australia, in Africa, you want to get a consistent experience, but that is uniquely local. And I think it's very much the same for our staff as well. Robin, this one's a bit of a tough one for you. What's the best way to gauge whether my company's corporate culture is strong and identify the best ways to improve it? And I think some of the questions that we're seeing is like, it's all well and good. Coca-Cola, surely it's a great brand. Surely everyone's happy there. And so I think this person's really trying to gauge at, how do you tell the strength of a culture and how I can improve it?
Yeah, I think there's a couple of ways. I mean, first, I think the first question I think you need to ask yourself is, are the cultural norms or behaviors that you're seeing in your organization consistent with and driving the growth or the long-term strategy that your company aspires to? So are those behaviors, in conflict with that, or are they truly supporting and advancing your progress toward your strategy? So that's one question. Additionally, I think it's looking at, leadership in terms of across the organization. Is that leadership strong and showing up in a way that's consistent and driving the right experiences for associates? And then another thing that I would look at is feedback. So collecting that feedback from employees to understand and get at what their experiences are. And as you evaluate that, are there any gaps or any areas where you see opportunities that are in conflict with what you're aspiring to be from a culture perspective and what you're aspiring to reach and attain from a business perspective? So I think it's really looking at what your strategy is. Are you seeing the right behaviors to push and drive that strategy, whether that be through leadership and or the stated employee experience?
Thanks, Robin. I think a question for both of you, the next one. Now that we are exactly 1 year into this pandemic, any thoughts on how to keep employee morale as high as possible? Maybe Mac, do you want to take that one first, and then Robin, we can bounce it to you.
I was hoping to learn from Robin's answer. It's obviously very hard. People are exhausted. People are experiencing Zoom fatigue. People are struggling with the balance between work and life or work-life integration. People are desperate for a vacation. People have had friends or family members get sick. People may miss their colleagues. People may feel lonely. People may be struggling with mental health issues. So all of these things we know to be true. And so trying to keep morale high, I think, needs to be a very deliberate effort of leadership. Perhaps you need to think about it more than pre-pandemic. Because it won't happen as naturally, some of the benefits. And, I think it's figuring out, what do employees need now? Is it in leaning into your strengths? So for Uber, people feel a really strong tie to our mission. And I think showing them the work that we're doing to move forward our mission, despite the most challenging circumstances of the pandemic, has probably been our most impactful work. So, we have, through the crisis, supported frontline workers, helped keep cities moving, provided food donations and food delivery services for isolated seniors. We've more recently shown up to support the vaccination efforts, providing transportation for underserviced individuals. And I think these are the types of things that inspire employees, because it's sort of using our core products for good. So that's just one example, but I think those types of things keep people bought in and makes folks feel like their work matters.
Thanks, Mac. I think well said. Robin, anything to add?
I like everything that Mac said. I think all of that is critical. And the only couple of additions I would make is, I think it's going to be important, and I've talked a lot about leadership today, but I think how leaders show up and continue to show up is going to be critical. But it's important that we take care of leaders and that we're take care of each other from a well-being perspective. But I think it's really going to be a scenario where we need to meet people where they are. We need to do a lot of listening and understand, to Mac's point, that people have different experiences or in different places, and continue to lead with empathy as we come through this. I also think, making a safe space and an inclusive environment where people know that it's okay to be themselves, to show up as their whole self at work, and know that we're going to navigate this together and take care of each other, and that there's a lot of support and resources available from a well-being perspective. So, I think it's just going to be really critical that we don't try to take a one approach across all teams, that leaders are really using situational leadership and managing their teams and providing the right support as we navigate the pandemic.
I think that last point is so critical, that leaders need to show that they're vulnerable and struggling with it too. And, I think that makes it okay for teams to feel that way as well. And I know when we've had leaders do that at Uber, it's been hugely impactful to how people are feeling.
Yes.
Yeah, I think if there was ever a time for situational leadership and empathy, as you guys have spoken about, it is this time. And just to close, this is going to be our last question today. I think we're hoping for a bit of inspiration. So, this question asks, have you been impressed with the resilience your employees have demonstrated in this past year? And if possible, could both of you share some examples? So, Mac, I might ask you if you could answer first, and then Robin, you'll get the last word.
Sure. I mean, overwhelmingly, my answer is yes. I have been impressed by our employee base and the resilience they've shown. For context, for folks who are listening, our business, the business that I run, so our mobility business, the classic Uber rides business, dropped by more than 80% over a period of 3 weeks, from March to April last year. And that was disastrous for us from a business results perspective, to have the business essentially disappear overnight. And, people showed up to make the best of it, despite not knowing whether they would have a job, all of the personal health and family considerations, all these different things. People put in extra work to really do what was needed to be done at the time to, adapt the platform for the health and safety needs into the pandemic, to support people who earn money on our platform, our drivers and delivery people, and make sure that they had safety supplies and the information they needed and the financial support they needed. People rallied for communities, as I said, either rides for essential workers or food for essential workers, working hand in hand with governments and not-for-profits to deliver those things. And then also, while a devastating time for the mobility business at Uber, the food delivery business really was booming. And we had to go all hands on deck to support the very, very rapid growth that business was experiencing. So to see teams pull together, go the extra mile for our communities, for our delivery and drivers, and for the business opportunities that were booming, was a super moment of pride for the leadership team. And we had, we do a weekly Q&A with our staff, and the kinds of questions that were making it to the top of that Q&A were, how do we move fast like this all the time? How do we, I've never felt so energized, like these types of things at the worst depths of the crisis in that first wave. And so, yes, I am super proud and impressed with our team.
Robin?
Yes. So, again, I was amazed at the resilience and how our team showed up as well. I think, similarly, we have a large population of essential workers who are in manufacturing plants. And so, those individuals showing up every day in the manufacturing plants, and how we pivoted to think about how we produce and run an operation where folks are going to be on site, and do that in such a way that there's the right protocols in place, and that people, are able to come to work, in a safe environment. And so the work that organization did was tremendous. In addition, within our food service business, a lot of our accounts certainly suffered as the pandemic hit, and we're shifting to more of a takeout or delivery model. And our teams leaned in and partnered with those customers to really help make that shift. And so you really saw a lot of creativity, a lot of commitment from those portions of the organization as well. And I would be remiss if I didn't call out our HR practitioners as well within the organization. I think, from an HR perspective, our team was tremendous in terms of all the various ways that we were leaning in to support the business and partner on business related problems, as well as how do you support employees and the organization as it was going through such significant stress and strain. So the ability to be able to pivot to how do you onboard everyone virtually? How do you deploy learning virtually? All of these types of things that we implemented while really looking at COVID in general and implementing processes and protocols and practices that were focused on our employees and their well-being was a tremendous lift. So from an HR perspective, I was tremendously proud of our HR practitioners.
Thank you, Robin. I think it's a good opportunity for myself and on behalf of Mac and the leadership team to really thank our HR professionals around the world with Uber. I mean, it was an incredibly difficult time, and the leadership we showed, as Robin and her team did at Coca-Cola, was significant and memorable. So thank you. I am sad to say that we're out of time. Thank you for leaving so many thoughtful questions on the chat. We're going to get back to you with that Q&A by email for the 5 or so for the many that we weren't able to answer. We're only able to answer 5 or so today. I would like to formally thank our 2 speakers, Robin G. of the Coca-Cola Company and Andrew Macdonald of our very own Uber for Business. Thank you for all your valuable insights. I think for me, I really take away a lot of interesting questions about how we'll make hybrid work and keep some of those good things about remote, about the flexibility, about the equality, but embrace some of that physical proximity again, which we've missed for the past year. I think it was some very interesting strategic discussions and how we think about employee engagement and the high value, globally consistent, but locally relevant ways to deliver that. But I think the biggest thing which I take away both from the examples you gave and the way that you spoke about it is that, crisis leadership is all about empathy. And ultimately, strong corporate culture starts at the top. And it's great to see that in both our company at Uber and at Coca-Cola, we have that, not just the words being said, but the tone and the actions being modeled. And to each of you leaders who've dialed in to the webinar today, thank you so much for attending. We hope you found it valuable. Please feel free to share it with friends and colleagues. And we look forward that you will join us in our future webinars of the site. Thank you so much. Have a great day.
Thank you. Thank you, Robin. Thanks, John.
Thank you.